The Last Curtain Circus. In a small town called Vyazma, lost among endless fields and frowning forests, a circus appeared every year in the fall. It was called the Circus of the Last Curtain. No one knew where it came from or where it disappeared after its last performance. Tents painted with scarlet and black patterns sprouted up in the vacant lot behind the old mill overnight like mushrooms after rain. The locals whispered that the circus was cursed, but the curiosity and boredom of the small town always overcame the fear. People came, bought tickets from the silent masked cashier, and sat on wooden benches that smelled damp and metallic. This year the circus arrived in Vyazma at the end of October, when the winds were already carrying the smell of stale leaves and cold rain. I, an 18-year-old student Tom, came to the town on vacation to my grandmother. Rumors about the circus reached me, and despite her warnings, "Don't go there, told me it's unclean," I decided to go. My childhood friend John was of the same opinion. "What should we be afraid of clowns?" He laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. We bought tickets for the evening performance, the last one of the season. The show starts. The circus outside looked like something out of an old horror movie. The shabby flags fluttered in the wind, and the lights that illuminated the entrance flickered as if they were about to go out. At the entrance stood a figure in a long cloak and cylinder, with a face hidden beneath the white mask. She didn't move, but I could feel her gaze following us as we walked inside. Inside, the tent was larger than it appeared from the outside. Rows of benches stretched to the center, where there was a circular arena covered in dark red sand. The ceiling was lost in the shadows, and from it hung ropes, chains, and some strange structures that looked like giant spider nets. The crowd was surprisingly sparse. A few families, a couple of old people, and a group of teenagers who giggled and took selfies. The smell inside was strange Swedish, with a touch of iron, as if someone had spilled syrup and blood. The lights went out, and the hall was plunged into darkness. There was a low, rumbling sound like the beat of a huge drum. A single ray of light flashed in the center of the arena, and a man appeared there. He was an entertainer, tall and thin, wearing a black tuxedo and a face painted like a doll's. White skin, black circles around his eyes, and a scarlet smile drawn from ear to ear. His voice was deep, but with some irregular, almost mechanical intonation. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Last Curtain Circus," he said, spreading his arms. "Tonight you will see something you will never forget. But remember, every performance has a price." I felt a chill run down my spine. John elbowed me and whispered, "What pathos, huh?" But I couldn't take my eyes off the entertainer. His eyes, despite the makeup, seemed as empty as two black wells. First performance. The first act was the acrobats. 4 men and women in tight costumes painted in vein-like patterns. They moved with inhuman grace, flying up on trapezes and hovering in the air as if they defied the laws of physics. Their faces were hidden by masks, and none of them made a sound, even as they performed dizzying stunts. The audience applauded, but I noticed that some of the spectators began to squirm in their seats, as if they sensed something wrong. At one point, one of the acrobats fell off the trapeze. The crowd gasped, but instead of falling, she hung in the air as if suspended on invisible strings. Her body arched at an unnatural angle, and I heard her bones crunch. She slowly raised her head, and the mask slipped off, revealing her face, or what should have been a face. It was smooth, gray skin with no eyes, nose, or mouth. The audience screamed, but the lights immediately went out, and when they came back on, the acrobats were gone and the arena was empty. The entertainer came on the stage as if nothing had happened. "Magnificent, isn't it?" he said, and his smile grew even wider. I looked at John. He was paler than shocked. "Topic, what the hell was that?" he whispered. I did not answer. I didn't have the words. Clowns in a cave. The next act was the clowns. They ran out into the arena with wild laughter, waving huge hammers and knives that looked all too real. Their faces were painted just like the entertainers, but the paint seemed to bleed as if they were sweating blood. One of the clowns ran to the edge of the arena, right up to John and me, and stared at me. His eyes were inhuman yellow, with vertical pupils like a snake's. He leaned in so close that I could feel his breath cold and smelling of rot. "You want to play?" he hissed, and his voice was like the scraping of metal. I recoiled, and he chuckled and ran back to his own. The clowns started juggling knives, tossing them higher and higher. One of them, accidentally, dropped a knife and it plunged into the arena a few centimeters from the feet of a woman in the front row. She screamed, but the clown just winked at her and continued the show. I noticed that some of the audience started to get up and make their way to the exit, but the doors through which we had entered were closed. There were thuds coming from outside, as if someone was trying to open them. Then a huge cage covered with black cloth was rolled out into the arena. The entertainer announced, "And now our main number, the beast that no one has ever seen and no one has ever tamed." The cloth from the cage was torn off, and inside was a man. A young guy, no older than Dima and me, in tattered clothes. His hands and feet were chained, and his face was contorted with horror. He was screaming, begging to be let out, but the audience was silent. Some even laughed, thinking it was part of the show. The clowns opened the cage and stepped inside. What happened next I can't describe in detail. My mind refuses to accept it. All I will say is that the guy's screams didn't last long, and when the clowns came out of the cage, their faces were covered in something red and they were licking their lips. The cage was empty. The final curtain. By this point, half the audience was in a panic. People were screaming, banging on the doors, but there was no way out. I grabbed John's arm and dragged him to the side wall of the tent, hoping to find a rip in the fabric, but the fabric was strange, warm, and slightly rippling, as if alive. John trembled, repeating, "We're going to die, Tom, we're going to die." The entertainer came out onto the arena again. His smile now was not just painted, it spread across his face, revealing teeth as sharp as needles. "You've paid for your tickets," he said, "and now it's time to pay the real price." The lights began to flicker, and I heard a rustle overhead. Figures began to descend from the ceiling tens, hundreds of creatures that looked like acrobats, but with long bony limbs instead of arms and legs. They moved jerkily, like marionettes, and their faces or lack thereof were just like those of that acrobat. They descended toward the audience, and screams filled the tent. I don't know how we managed to get out. All I remember is tearing the fabric of the tent with such force that it ripped, and John and I ran into the night. We were chased by sounds, laughter, scraping, shouting. We ran until we reached the town, and only then did we stop, panting. Epilogue. The next day we returned to the wasteland. The circus was gone, as if it had never existed. No marquees, no flags, no trace of it. The police didn't believe our story, and the locals just shook their heads and said we weren't the first to see such things. My grandmother, when I told her everything, crossed herself and made me drink some herbal infusion to cleanse myself. John changed after that night. He hardly spoke, and a month later he left Blossom and cut off all contact. I still have nightmares. And then I'm back in that tent, and the entertainer is looking at me with his empty eyes. He hands me the ticket and whispers, "You didn't pay all the way." Every fall I wait for the circus to come back, and I know that if it shows up, I cannot go, because the last curtain circus always collects its fee.